I thought he hated me, but he was in love with me. I like you, Jaime, Tony declared so casually it made me feel like he was discussing yesterday's homework. I don't, what? The words came out of my mouth clumsily and broken. I was sure I had heard wrong. That was the only explanation. No way! This didn't make any sense in my head. The possibility of Tony having feelings seemed so ridiculous that I asked myself if we were in an alternate reality. The only emotions I imagined he had for me was annoyance and maybe some anger, especially due to the nature of our relationship. After all, we were at most two rivals who did nothing but compete and fight. It had always been that way since we met in freshman year when we first joined the school's basketball team. It started as a competition at the beginning to see who was the best, but as time went by, this rivalry went beyond the court. Somehow we began to compete for who had the best grades on the exams or who answered the most questions from the teacher. At every single opportunity we had, we found rivalry in even the small activities in our daily lives. However, one day this stopped being enough for us, and between small jokes, things turned into prank wars, battling to see who could get the other better. These jokes could be anything. There was no longer any limits between us. For example, the prank I was proudest of pulling off was when I was able to convince the entire team to lie to Tony that we would have a surprise practice on a Saturday morning. It was difficult to bribe everyone, but the overwhelming amount of messages I received from Tony and the expression on his face that Monday when we met again made it all worth it. A light went on in my mind. Tony hadn't returned that prank to me. Not on the same level, at least. Now everything finally made sense. So, this was payback? It was crazy and bold, but I wouldn't put it past him. You like me, you say? I asked, knowing, a smile appearing on my face. Yes, he answered without hesitation, but his eyes looked down at the ground. I do, and I have for quite some time. I chuckled at his great acting. It was surprising he even prepared a corny speech. I applauded his efforts, but if he wanted to play this game, I wasn't going to back down. Well then, let's go on a date. Excuse me? Now it was Tony's turn to look astonished. I had to force myself to not let out an evil laugh. You said you like me, right? I walked a step closer to him, with a defying look in my eyes. I'd assume you'd want to date me unless you don't actually have feelings for me. I was testing Tony to see how far he was going to play. I was thrilled to think I had reached his limits, sensing the feeling of another win in my bag. I'd love to, Tony stupidly smiled at me, big and bright. My expression faltered. You'd love to? Yeah, he nodded excitedly. His hands reached to hold mine, which surprised me so much I wasn't able to react. What about tomorrow? We go out to eat together? You can choose the restaurant. I forced a smile out and forced myself not to pull back from his foreign touch. This was going to be so much harder than expected, but it always was with Tony. But I refused to show defeat. Tomorrow it is. The next day. After a long time of planning, I realized which one was the only course of action I could take. Be unbearable. If Tony wanted to act like he was in love with me, then I would make it the hardest for him. If he didn't want to give up, then I would force him to do so. My first move in my plan was to choose a seafood restaurant. Although this was not my favorite thing to eat, I knew I would love the place for the simple fact that Tony hated it. I was dying to see his reaction. Sadly, when he picked me up and I told him the place I wanted to go, his big smile didn't even falter. I wondered if maybe his distaste for seafood had recently changed in such a short time. But when we sat down, Tony looked at the menu and he ended up deciding on a plain salad. I figured he still hated fish. That was confusing. This is delicious, I claimed as I ate the shrimp I ordered. A teasing smile formed on my face. Don't you agree? Tony nodded more to acknowledge me rather than to agree. I'm so glad you liked it. It pissed me off he said it so genuinely. So I pinched one of my shrimps with my fork and I offered it to him. I arched my eyebrow. When he hesitated, just looking at the piece of food, Try this. I'm sure you'll love it. He looked at me like he'd rather puke on me, but he still proceeded to eat the shrimp in just one bite, his eyes never leaving mine. He even licked his lips as he did. I looked away when I noticed I was staring. I cleared my throat. Really good, right? Yeah, he agreed. He lifted his hand from his lap, and for a second, my breath quivered when I thought he was going to grab mine, but instead, he rested his hand on top of the table, inches from my fingers, his pinky nearly grazing mine. I think it's just the company that makes it good, honestly. I rolled my eyes, pretending my cheeks weren't heating. Wow, smooth. Tony laughed at that. After that, I tried relentlessly to be the worst date possible. I interrupted him, I didn't laugh at his jokes, and I even talked with my mouth full. But the biggest response I got throughout the whole dinner was a laugh. He looked at me almost as if he found my every flaw endearing and silly. When we were done eating, I didn't even reach for the check, but he didn't seem to mind at all. I was impressed by his efforts to make this prank as believable as possible. When we were in his car, instead of taking me home, he just turned the stereo on and sat there. I looked at him confused until he turned the volume up and I recognized the song. I couldn't help but smile. This song, I started saying. Yeah, it's your song. He rested his head against the back of the seat and looked at me. The annoying one you always sing when you beat me, which doesn't happen often, by the way. He looked at me, almost knowing I would say something. It happens quite often. What are you talking about? I defended myself. I don't think that often, he shrugged, like he wasn't sure, but oh, I was sure. Well, I know it. Tony laughed instead of continuing the argument like he would usually do. I was annoyed, but still a small smile crept into my face. I remember when I first heard you sing it, he said, while now looking forward. He tapped the steering wheel a couple of times before letting out a chuckle. It was actually when we first met at practice. Do you remember? Oh yeah, I nodded while chuckling at the memories. We were practicing and you were so hard trying to one-up me, he covered his mouth and looked at me in disbelief. I don't remember it quite like that, I whispered, pouting a little bit because he was right. You didn't even know me, Tony laughed harder this time. Oh, don't act like it was all me, I complained, rolling my eyes. Like you didn't stay after practice just to compete to see who could score more? Yeah, I did, he whispered, and then his eyes looked deeply into mine before a small smile appeared on his face. And I'm glad I did. Of course you are, you won. That night we talked for several hours until the night had fallen. I had even forgotten about my plan, and I was having a good time. I was surprised because this was the first time we properly talked outside of the usual teasing and trash talking. Tony shared stories about his family and childhood, and I did the same. When I joked, he laughed like I was the funniest guy he had ever met. It was overall really nice. When he dropped me at my house, it surprised me when he also got out of the car and walked me to the door, but I also appreciated it because even if I wouldn't have admitted it, I didn't want this conversation to end. When we were right in front of the door of my house, we both hesitated, looking at each other. Jaime, listen, Tony started with nervousness in his voice, which made me feel a chill running through my body. Thanks for going out with me today. I had a lot of fun, and I hope we can do this again. Sure, I answered, disoriented by his earnestness. I'd completely forgotten that we were on a date. Tony smiled and looked at me while taking a deep breath as if he was taking me in. You look handsome, by the way. When his hand stretched out to gently arrange my hair, I froze, but I didn't pull away. His hand settled on my cheek for a moment before completely retreating, leaving a tingling sensation on me. I had to breathe deeply to regain composure, and I quickly said goodbye before getting inside my house. I leaned against the door and felt myself spiral. The honesty, the intimacy, his smiles, the way he would stare at me, everything Tony showed me in a few hours was something I had never seen from him. I felt a strange feeling in my chest because Tony must be the best actor in the world, or maybe this was all more than just a joke. The next day. What is wrong with you? My friend Nate asked me, which made me snap back to reality. We had been having lunch together, but my mind was somewhere else. I shrugged while I gave my forgotten sandwich another bite. What do you mean? You've been weird all day, distracted and shit, he accused me. I opened my mouth pondering if I should just say anything, but it was pointless. Fine, sorry, just had a lot on my mind. Nate sighed and put his sandwich down. What is it? I took a deep breath and I thought about the best way to approach this. Nate was a chill and trustworthy guy, so I knew I could rely on him. But this whole situation was so wacky, it was difficult to explain. Well, something happened, I started saying. I closed my eyes, already cringing at myself. With Tony. That guy again, he scoffed. Nate, being also on the team and being my friend, knew firsthand how things were between Tony and me. He definitely didn't like Tony very much. What did he do this time? Mess with your homework again? No, not that. I wish that he had done that instead of being in this new predicament. He confessed to me. Nate looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Clumsily, I explained everything to him, how I thought at the beginning everything was another simple prank, and that was the reason I decided to ask him on a date, to annoy him back. I also went in depth about my new anxiety-inducing doubts about whether Tony meant it or not. It was nice finally letting everything out, and surprisingly, Nate listened to me quietly, taking everything in. I could tell he was weirded out, and I thought I was crazy, but at least he didn't say it. I appreciated it because I was already embarrassed as it was. Okay, Nate said once I finished talking. He blinked a couple of times before continuing. You are a moron. Don't you think I already know that? I snapped at him in frustration, ran my hand through my hair. What should I do? Nate shrugged. Keep it up with the prank? No way. Nate had also lost it. I frantically shook my head in disbelief. Okay, chill and listen, he continued, talking before I could even curse at him. He grabbed both of my shoulders in his hands and clapped them. Continue the prank, distract him for a little, mess up with him. It'll be fine. Did you not listen to me? I tapped my ear a couple times. What if he is actually in love with me? Even saying that made me blush. So what? He prompted. If he doesn't like you, then this is payback for trying to joke about something like that. And if he does, well, string him along. Who cares? Don't you think that is going too far? I whispered. Sorry, but I lost any kind of respect for him when he lied to you about his mother being dead a while back. Oh yeah, he did that. I had almost forgotten. One time I insulted him and said something about his mom in the heat of the moment. He answered by saying I was a jerk because his mother was long gone. He got me good that one time. You were feeling guilty and sad for like 2 weeks before you found out the truth. He looked pissed about it still, but I truly wasn't. At the time I was upset, but after later I thought it was a good prank. I was only eager to one-up him. He crossed the line there. That idiot doesn't know limits. Why should you? If you ask me, it's well deserved. I nodded, still unsure about everything. Maybe Nate was right. The next day, I spent the whole day thinking about what Nate had said. He was right in our prank war. There were never limits. Logically speaking, it would be a good opportunity to get back at him, and I wouldn't have to feel guilty that hypothetically Tony did have feelings for me. Everything was fair game, but I couldn't help that feeling in the pit of my stomach that made me nervous about this whole situation. I wanted to avoid Tony until I had everything figured out, but that was impossible given that we had practiced together and there was no way in hell I would skip because of him. I would never give him that pleasure. When he walked into the gym, his eyes scanned the room until he found mine. He didn't approach me, he just smiled. I blinked a couple of times and then looked away. He wasn't helping my decision-making. The practice continued as normally as it did, and I tried my best to concentrate on my business. Everything was going relatively well until the end of the day they separated us into 2 teams, and obviously I had to be against Tony. Normally, this would excite me, but now I just felt nervous. Throughout the entire game, Tony being Tony spent his time guarding me, always getting in my way. If I was 100% focused, this wouldn't have been such a problem, but with so many emotions inside of me, I practically couldn't touch the ball the entire game. When I thought the frustration and embarrassment couldn't increase, that's when Tony showed me different. Just because you are cute doesn't mean I'm going to go easy on you. Keep it up, loser, he whispered in my ear once the game was over. I flushed at that, mostly out of anger. All this time, I was here drilling my head, worrying about him, and he was just as always a competitive idiot. Fine, I could perfectly be like that too. I wouldn't care either if he had feelings for me or not. I wasn't going to go easy on him. As he was walking away, I followed him and grabbed him by the shoulder, making him spin around. "So, when is our next date?" I asked. 3 weeks later. That's how I continued going on dates with Tony. I'd like to say it was annoying, but if I ignored the fact that it was all a lie, I always had a good time. The conversations were fun and our hobbies were quite similar. We both loved doing physical and exciting activities, so we always had a blast. It was embarrassing to admit that he was the first person I had dated that made me feel such a connection, and it was fake. At least, the plan seemed to be working, even if it was unconsciously. Tony was no longer as focused on things as he was before. In class, I can notice him constantly staring at me instead of trying to compete with me with grades. And during practice, he would try to fool around and flirt with me rather than give me his all. I should be happy, but there was a small voice in my head making me feel like everything was wrong about this. "Hey, are you okay?" Tony asked me as he gently touched my hand. This sort of physical contact was something that already become natural between us, but still made me jump. That annoying warm feeling in my stomach was present again. I blinked a couple of times. I tried to smile. "Yeah, of course." We were sitting on a bench at the park after going for a walk. The lemonade I had previously bought was already warming in my hand and I had barely drunk from it. "Tell me something about yourself," I said, just to distract him because I couldn't stand his questioning eyes. "Like what?" "Anything," I shrugged. "Something I don't know. Like, about your family, or you as a child, I don't know." Tony scratched his neck hesitant, but he wasn't going to say no to me. "Well, when I was 12, we moved here because of my dad's job. My sister loved it, my mom, not so much." "Your mom who you lied about being dead?" I tried teasing him, but when my eyes found him, my smile slowly died from my face. He didn't look like he appreciated my comment. "I didn't lie." I paled. "So, she is..." "No." "Then you did lie," I accused him. "That time, I only said she was gone, because she had left us a year after coming here. You assumed differently," he explained calmly, and I felt a pang of guilt again about the topic. "Oh, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I stumbled on my words, unsure of what to say. I felt awkward. "Yeah, but don't feel bad," he nudged my shoulder with his, and a small playful smirk appeared on his face. "It's not like I made an effort to correct you. Your sad puppy face was too funny." I gasped and pushed him away, slapping his chest a couple of times. "I knew it!" "Hey," he grabbed my wrist while giggling. "Don't hate the player, hate the game." I smirked at his words, and my eyes squinted at him. "I hate the player, and I love the game." His hand still on my arm, caressed my wrist, and pulled me even closer. I nodded slowly with a confident smile. "Jaime, the thing is, I don't believe that at all." I chuckled, and his eyes looked down to my lips. This time he got even closer, and my smile dropped when I realized his intentions. That annoying warm feeling began to spread again in my stomach, and my breath hitched. Tony maybe noticed my uneasiness and sighed, backing up away a little. His hands cut my face just for a moment, maybe trying to calm me down? I'm not sure why, but I found that endearing. When he tried to pull away, I was the one pulling him closer by the neck, and without even thinking about it, my lips were already on his. He didn't move, and that's when I noticed how crazy my behavior was being. I tried to retreat, but he immediately brought me closer by the shoulders, kissing me back, my heart beating loud in my chest. "I like you so much," he whispered against my lips, and the fuzzy feeling in my stomach was clouded by an ugly, heavy feeling of guilt. The next day, the heavy realization that maybe I had deeper feelings for Tony was eating me alive. It was unnerving how much space he was taking in my mind. I used to think the only reason I was constantly thinking about him was because I wanted to confirm that the prank was successful, but that was only an excuse. The worst happened. I had developed feelings for him. After the kiss, I spent hours freaking out. I couldn't even sleep. Even though we didn't have classes that day, I still had to go to practice and face Tony. I had so many mixed feelings along the lines of regret and guilt. I started this dangerous game and I fell for him like a moron. A million things went through my head, like, what if Tony never had feelings for me, and all this time he was the one playing me? Or what's worse, what if he did have feelings for me? I couldn't allow myself to think about the implications of that option. When I went to practice, I arrived just in time. Perfectly timed so there wouldn't be time to interact with anyone, especially Tony. My eyes looked around for Nate. I needed his support, but he was nowhere to be found, which wasn't that strange for him. The guy enjoyed playing almost as much as he did sleeping. When I saw Tony, I only nodded to greet him and proceeded to focus on warming up. It wasn't that strange for me to put my 100% on in practice, so I was hopeful that Tony wouldn't notice something was wrong. When we were finished, I immediately headed towards the showers, planning to waste my time there. Maybe Tony would leave even before I went out, but that seemed unlikely. 20 minutes later. "Oh hey!" I jumped when I heard Tony. My hands unconsciously went to hide my body as I was still under the shower water. I had never felt shy about nudity, but now with Tony it was different. I forced myself to look towards him and was met only with his back. He was talking to me but turning to the other side. Was he trying to be respectful? I couldn't help a big stupid smile forming on my face, especially because his red ears and neck didn't go unnoticed. "I need to go pick up my sister, but maybe we could hang out tomorrow?" Tony put both his hands inside his pockets and swayed on his feet. This was the moment for me to stop this madness, to tell him the truth of everything, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. "Sure." After we said our goodbyes, he left and jumped out of the shower and looked around. Everyone had already left. I dressed and desperately looked for my phone in my gym bag and dialed Nate. I breathed out once he answered. "Something happened." "Oh hell no, last time you said that you dropped a big bomb on me," I heard him shuffling and moving around. Okay, I sat down. "Is it Tony related?" It was, more than he could imagine. "Yeah, Nate, I messed up big time," I groaned. "Okay, breathe." He inhaled and exhaled in a slow rhythm to show me. "You are fine, just say it." My feelings for Tony changed a little too much for the better. The silence was deafening. "You are an idiot. You were supposed to pretend, not fall for him." "I know!" My hands went to my hair and I started pacing around anxiously. "I know that I was supposed to play him, okay? I wasn't expecting this development. What should I do?" "I don't know, date him for real?" I could almost see him shrug. I hated him. "Are you crazy? We dislike this guy. He's a real pain in my head, a rude show-off who doesn't know when to stop. I hate his guts," I rumbled on. "That's not what you said 5 seconds ago, though." "Shut up, he is the worst, okay? At this point, I was just saying things to convince myself. I could never see something serious with him. It's just impossible." "Okay then, break it off." "Ugh, it's not that easy." My eyes wandered around distressed, and that's when I saw a familiar red jacket lying on the bench. I grabbed it and confirmed it was Tony's. "You know what? Goodbye, useless." I grabbed my backpack and walked out the door when I hung up. I stopped when I was met with dark set of eyes. My heart stopped when I saw Tony just standing there outside against the wall. Hey, Tony," I stuttered. "You surprised me. I thought you left." He had a serious expression, jaw clenched, his lips making a thin line. Normally, he would smile at me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice showing nervousness. He stared at me coldly, and a terrible feeling crept into me. "Oh, sure. I have to congratulate you. You outdid yourself this time. Great prank." My heart started beating erratically. He had heard me. I gulped almost painfully. I couldn't find the words. Should I apologize? Explain? Maybe double down? "You worked hard on this one, don't you think? You must have hated it so much," he said with venom in his voice. "Listen to me. At the beginning, I thought you were joking, so I wanted to play along, okay?" I tried desperately to explain. "That's what you and I do, right? Tease and prank each other? Come on." Tony looked at me, not convinced at all. "But what about after?" "What?" "You said at the beginning you thought I was joking, and then what about after?" I opened my mouth and I closed it. I didn't have the guts to say it, to put into words the terrible actions I did, because I was aware of how bad everything was. "You knew!" He pointed an accusatory finger towards me, his voice shaky with anger. "You realize I actually had feelings for you, and you still went for it. You were just mocking me all this time." I wanted to say it wasn't like that, but Knew I couldn't. I was aware of how much of a jerk I was. Well, congrats. You've officially won, Tony said before yanking the jacket from my arms and walking away. A month later. After that, I tried my best to apologize to Tony, thinking he would yell at me, but he didn't. All I got was a forced smile and, it's fine. After that, Tony avoided me, which wasn't strange, but on the occasions when we were forced to be together, like in practice, he treated me strangely cordially. It was a false kindness that created a huge wall between us. As time went by, I also stopped looking for him, simply because it was too painful. The guilt of ruining everything between us, our strange friendship, and the potential we had for something more was difficult for me to bear. Eventually, a month went by, and I realized the time we had spent together dating was shorter than the time we had already spent apart. It was quite saddening. Practice became the only thing I looked forward to, mostly because it was the only place where I had the opportunity to see Tony, even if it was from a distance. I constantly thought about Tony, and it was a miracle that I hadn't affected my performance while playing. Even though we were about to have the last game of the season, the only thing I could do was look around for him. I started to feel uneasy when I couldn't find him. The game was about to start. The coach cursed and shouted someone's name to replace Tony. I tried my best to play, but my mind wouldn't stop wondering why he wasn't there. Even though this was one of the most important games, I didn't feel anything. This wasn't right at all, not without him. The ball I had just caught fell out of my hands with a loud thud. I stood still and looked around. Everyone was screaming, but I couldn't understand them. I walked out of the court and stupidly apologized to the coach before seeing him turning red in anger. My ears were ringing and my heart beating loud in my chest as I ran towards the closest bus station. When I made it to the front of Tony's house, my breathing was agitated and I was sweaty all over. Jaime? I had never seen him so surprised before. In other circumstances, I would tease him. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you, I said, still trying to catch my breath. He rolled his eyes and tried to close the door, but my hand stopped him. Listen to me, please, I desperately begged. I know I messed up, that I was a jerk for doing that to you, okay? I should have never played with your feelings like that. You didn't deserve that. Even though I had tried to apologize before, this time it felt real, even though it came out of a clumsy ramble. He looked at me with his eyebrows pinched. Tony blinked a couple times before clearing his throat. He nodded. He finally was accepting my apology. Why didn't you go to the game? Because lately I haven't been enjoying playing as much, Tony whispered. Actually, I've never really been that passionate about basketball. I looked at him confused. But what about all the times we played against each other? You look like you were enjoying yourself. He shrugged. That was different. Because you were playing with me, right? I asked, hopeful. You're so full of yourself. No, I didn't mean it like that, I explained. It is the same for me. Today, I left in the middle of the game because you weren't there. Tony's jaw dropped to the floor. Are you crazy? Yeah, lately I've been... One of my hands went to rest on his neck, and I was surprised he didn't pull back. You are making me crazy. I cannot stop thinking about you because I like you, okay? And I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Tony looked at me suspiciously and maybe even nervously. Stop joking. I'm a pain in your head, remember? You said it. It's impossible. Whatever you heard that time, I didn't mean it. I was just freaking out because of how much I liked you. He analyzed me up and down, arms crossing on his chest. He sighed defeated. I swear to God, if this is another attempt to mock me... It's not. I'm being serious. There is no one I want to spend my time with. Only you. I grabbed his hand and squeezed. Tony grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and kissed me harshly. It was sweet or passionate, like our last kiss. It felt mostly angry. He even bit my lip, but it was okay. We were going to be okay. Next week. Tony and I started dating officially after. I still felt guilty about my past actions, and even though Tony said everything was forgiven, I still did my best to make up for it. On our first real date, I insisted on him choosing the place and bought him some flowers. When he picked me up, he looked flustered and giddy after taking the flowers. I was happy he liked them. So, What did you decide to eat today? I asked as I fastened my belt. We are going to a steakhouse, he answered. I couldn't help the face I made. I wasn't a big fan of red meat. I quickly schooled my face because I didn't want to act like a brat in front of him. Tony smiled devilishly. Oh, is there a problem? Oh, he knew. Of course. I shook my face and laughed. Is this payback? Yes. He sweetly pecked my lips and my stomach fluttered. If I get more of those, I won't complain at all. After that, Tony and I continued dating, happy every day to spend time with each other. Nate congratulated us and laughed when he commented on how strange we were. Tony decided that he was no longer going to continue playing basketball, especially since he wanted to focus on school. I, on the other hand, wanted to continue playing because I was quite good, and since Tony was always going to see me play, the motivation to do my best was not lacking. Although, the coach never really forgave me for my behavior in the last game, I didn't mind the stricter treatment he gave me. The end. Have you ever felt attracted to your classmate? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.